Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with.
Lynne Hardy, line editor for the Rivers of London role-playing game and associate editor for Call of Cthulhu at Chaosium.
and that is what we're going to talk about today, Rivers of London, the role-playing game. So I'm always curious about how certain properties get greenlit for books to be made into role-playing games. And Rivers of London, anyone that's a fan of mysteries and fantasy will probably have heard of this. But why do you know why this, like, how did this come to be, this project?
I do, because it's my fault. It's partly my fault. It's also partly Mike Mason's fault. Um, I, as most of us in this sort of fandom do, I went through a period of reading every fantasy book that I could get my hands on when I was a teenager. But I kind of fell out of love with a lot of them because they were all very stereotypical, full of tropes. But I mean, my one great love was murder mysteries because I'd been raised on Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes, various incarnations of Agatha Christie dramatizations, David Suchet as Poirot, Joan Hickson as Miss Marple. So like Jeremy Brett as Sherlock Holmes as well. So I absolutely loved my murder mysteries, and friends kept recommending Rivers of London to me. But for years I put off because of the urban fantasy tag, and it was like, I'm done with fantasy. I'm not really interested. And then it was basically a case of, well, there's all these people do keep telling me that I really should read them, and some of them I actually trust their judgment and their sense of taste. So perhaps I really should actually go pick one of these up. And I was at a loose end and I needed a book to read. So I went and picked up the first one, promptly devoured it in not one sitting, but it wasn't greater than three. And then read all the other ones that were then at that point in print and really, really enjoyed them. And also by that point, I'm working on Call of Cthulhu. And it's like, I'm looking at it going, this is a fantastic setup for a role-playing game. It's an investigative murder mystery game with a hint of magic on the side. It's very well written. Ben is obviously a complete nerd because of all the references in it. There's a huge number of cultural references from my childhood and people of a certain age's childhood in Britain. So, it was very, very funny, really solidly constructed mysteries, and a lot of fun as well. I mean, there's some really horrible stuff goes off in some of the books, but it's leavened by that sense of humour, which sometimes is a little bit black, but that's a very British kind of thing. So for a long time, it was like, yeah, I think this needs to be a game. Wonder if Ben would be interested. Now, I live near Newcastle, and Ben does lots of book tours. He's a very big supporter of bookshops and libraries and literacy. But he always seems to miss Newcastle out, usually because he's in Edinburgh and then gets the train and goes straight down to York. The odd times he ever was in Newcastle, I was usually at the other end of the country, or I was on a different continent. So I never actually got to sort of see him. I'd been introduced to him years before at UK Games Expo by James Swallow, who'd been going to do some consulting work with Modiphius when I was with them. But never really had more than a, oh, hello, pleased to meet you kind of conversation with him. And then he announced he was going to be at Newcastle Waterstones signing, and it was Lies Sleeping. And I was chatting to Mike, I think the day before, about going to see him and how I thought this would be a really good game. He said, well, do you genuinely think there's a good game in it? And I said, well, yes, I do. So he said, well, why don't you ask him then? And I thought, well, why not? So I made sure I got into Newcastle very, very early. I was at the Waterstones door waiting for them to open so I could be at the front of the queue, even though this is like an hour before the signing was due to start. Because I thought, I've kind of got to get to him first. And then, I'm not prolonging the agony of waiting to actually ask him and getting told to go away. I'd not long been taken on as Mike's second in command by that point. So I didn't have any official business cards. I only had my personal ones, and I'd written my Chaosium email address on them. So that looked really professional. So I'm at the front of the queue. Ben comes out. I wandered up, gets him to sign my copy of Lies Sleeping. He said, oh, have you ever thought of having a role-playing game based on this? And he went, yes. And And he went, right, who do you work for? And I said, well, I work for Chaosium, and I gave him my card. And he went, oh, that's fantastic, because I always wanted it to be a BRP game. So it was one of those amazing, weird things where everything collided at just the right time. So then obviously there was a year of negotiations to make sure that the license was, sorted out, and we knew what we knew what we were doing. Ben's agent understood what we were doing, because Ben's agent didn't know what role-playing games were. Ben had to gently explain to them they weren't computer games, so he was never going to make his fortune off them. And Ben has referred to this multiple times as his vanity project. He wanted his role-playing game. So, with Ben's help, we got everything sorted out. And then we announced the license at Dragon Meet. And then we started working on the game.
Now, for those that are not familiar with Rivers of London, how would you best describe it? It's a mystery, it's supernatural, fantasy, a lot of history and mythology involved as well.
Huge amounts, yes. So urban fantasy tends to be used to describe fantasy novels that are set in a world that's very, very similar to our own. It's sort of only one step removed, usually with some sort of magic in there. The Rivers of London series are urban fantasy murder mysteries, and they're very well plotted crime stories. And at the centre of them is a character called Peter Grant. Now, he accidentally, by being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time, depending on how you look at it, ends up being recruited into the Metropolitan Police's worst kept secret, the Folly, which is basically the magic branch of the Metropolitan Police Service, who are charged with investigating crimes that are that little bit beyond normal. So a magic aspect or a supernatural aspect to them.
And so this game is not a source book for Call of Cthulhu or anything like that. This is its own role-playing game.
It is its own role-playing game. I mean, we did very, very early on discuss, do we want this to be a supplement for Call of Cthulhu? And it was decided that no, it needed to be its own thing. Partly, obviously, because it's set in the modern day. And we know that modern day Call of Cthulhu scenarios don't sell as well as the historical period ones. And it really did just need to be its own thing. In part because of the magic system, because the magic system in Call of Cthulhu is basically set up to destroy investigators, let's face it. Once you've started casting spells, you are on a slippery slope that you're not recovering from. It's all downhill from there on in. And as Ben likes to describe Rivers of London, it's Call of Cthulhu with added hope. So, it's not, you're not in that downward spiral. I mean, there are serious ways you can hurt yourself by doing magic, but we needed to make sure that the system was tailor-made to support the types of stories that Ben tells in the novels and Andrew Cartmel tells in the graphic novels. So, yeah, it couldn't be a Call of Cthulhu supplement. If you wanted to use some of the rules in Call of Cthulhu, you can, because obviously it's based on Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. And that was one of the things that I asked Paul Fricker to do as lead designer, was to take all the wonderful things that him and Mike had done with Call of Cthulhu 7th edition and streamline it and make it more of a narrative storytelling system that still had a bit of crunch for our fans, but was straightforward enough for people who'd never role played before to pick it up and go with it and tell stories in the universe of the novels that they were fans of.
So if it's not like the magic system in Call of Cthulhu, how would you describe the magic system in Rivers of London? Like, what would you compare it or describe it as?
Well, in the novels, it's very much like Ars Magica, and there is a reason for that, because Ben was a massive gamer back in the day, and he loves Ars Magica. So basically, the way magic works, at least in what's known as the Newtonian tradition, which is the formal British magic system, there are different magic systems all around the world, they all work slightly differently, is that you form spells by creating sort of patterns in your mind, and you link those to certain key words. So you've got like a focus, and that's called a former. And then you string these formi together to form spells. And the complexity of the spell is determined by how many formi it has, and you can put other bells and whistles on to make them do fancy things. So it's all very much an Ars Magica type. You take this word and it has a certain effect, you take that word and it has a certain effect, and you pop them together and you'll get your spell. So that was one thing that we looked at when designing the magic system. And that gives you an awful lot of freedom. But as I mentioned, I wanted this game really to be as much for fans of the novels who'd never gamed before as it was for gamers who were discovering the novels. So that's very intimidating for people who've never run games before, they've never played games before, and it puts an awful lot of expectation on the players and the GM to come up with things on the fly. And we didn't really want to do that because that can be very off-putting, and that's the last thing we wanted to do. The other great thing about For Me is that it basically gives you a level system for spells, because a spell that has one former is a first order spell. A spell that has two For Me is a second order spell. So in the end, we went for a level-based system with the spells, as many of the spells that we could find in the novels translated into gaming terms so that people have got plenty to play with.
So is the rule system also it's something as in like combat and skill selection?
Yeah, I mean it does have combat. It's still a big chapter of the combat and rule system because it's an entirely, well, not entirely new. It's a streamlined version of 7th edition with tweaks to make it do what we wanted it to do. So there is combat in there because, of course, we have plans for the future and other places. Just because sort of fighting isn't a big part of the novels, but it does happen. So it needs to be there. There are gun rules in there as well. Now, guns are not a particular feature of British police except under particular circumstances. But again, we know that, you have to have those things in to start with if you're creating a new system with the thought of doing a line in future. So yes, there is combat in there, but it's not the be all and end all of the game. But we know it's going to happen because player characters, they're going to get into fisticuffs. So it is all there. But we try to simplify it and make it a little bit more intuitive and a lot more storytelling than in 7th edition.
Okay. And what options can someone be in this game?
Well, one of the things that I do like about Call of Cthulhu is the occupations. So we looked at the occupations that existed. For Call of Cthulhu, we got rid of a whole load because they weren't really appropriate for the setting. And we came up with some new ones that were appropriate for the setting, particularly ones that reflected characters that appear in the novels. So things like paramedics and journalists and influencers, sort of modern things. We still couldn't come up with a better term than dilettante for rich with too much money and too much time on their hands. So we kind of stuck with that, partly because, like I said, we tried to come up with a new name and couldn't think of anything that really encapsulated it, but also as a loving nod to where the game had come from. So you pick your occupation. It has a recommended skills that you either need to have as part of that occupation or ones that, we strongly suggest that you have. And you get to have 6 starting skills that are better than your average person. And you can have advantages, and they give you little bits of edges as well. Because one of the things that we had to look at was that we know most people are going to want to be magic users of some sort, whether they're part of the Metropolitan Police or not. But we also know that some people aren't going to want to be using magic. They're going to want to do other things. So we had to make sure that there was other systems in there that meant that they weren't getting left behind. And that's where the advantages come in. So if you want to be able to use magic, you get to pick 1 advantage. If you don't want to use magic, you get to pick 2 advantages, and they give you bonuses. They might make you naturally tough, so you're a bit more resistant to damage. It might be that you have a signature weapon that you fight with, like Detective Sergeant Sarah Gulid. So we tried to make it varied. We tried to give to support to make non-magic using characters interesting as well.
Oh, okay. Now, when it comes to I guess you could say that the bestiary, because I'm assuming when I'm pulling from the Cthulhu mythos, Rivers of Lynn has its own. I mean, for example, they have ghosts.
They do.
Is that what does the bestiary consist of exactly?
Well, the bestiary consists of NPC stats for a lot of the major characters, not all of them. We had to leave out some fan favourites because we just physically didn't have room, and hopefully they will appear at some point in the future in something else. Toby the dog is there. There are certain mystical creatures in there. Certain of the Thames family are in there as well. So one of the main sets of characters in the novels are things called genii locorum, spirits of place, and they're, at least in the main part, they're to do with the rivers, hence the title, The Rivers of London. So we've got quite a few of the rivers statted up. We've got rules for how their magic works, because it's not the same as how Newtonian magic works. And a few creatures from the books that have appeared in the various novels, so that keepers, GMs, have a toolkit of characters that they can bring on into their mysteries for their players and their player characters and investigators to have a look and interact with, but also to give them a basis to then go on and develop their own creatures from the ones that we didn't stat up.
And what's the artwork for this exactly? Is it mimicking some of the previous works that Chaosium put out, or are you going in a different direction?
Well, we try to go for a different direction. Obviously, it's set in the real world, so you need a degree of realism in there, but also there's the graphic novels. So that's a thing. So I was aiming to get somewhere between the style of the graphic novels and the realistic. And I think for the most part, we actually managed to do that pretty well. And it does look very different to Call of Cthulhu. And that was a deliberate choice, because this isn't Call of Cthulhu and we wanted to make it recognizably different. So you open it, you flick through the book, it is definitely not a Call of Cthulhu book.
Being that this takes place in London, was there anything different when it comes to map making or anything like that?
Well, we had a fantastic map maker who did the big map of London, Alyssa McFadden, and she did a fabulous job. So she came in and she did that one, and the design brief was to make it look like one of these tourist maps that you would pick up, and she did an absolutely fantastic job. And there's a lovely little decal on the bottom of it, which is several of the characters from the Folly done in an Aardman style cartoon, and Ben absolutely loved those. And that's one of the things that's been a joy about this, is that we got to work very closely with Ben, because Ben's very keen, very knowledgeable about games. He saw everything, he approved everything, from the maps to the artwork to text, the lot. So, it's all with his blessing. And he was a joy to work with. So yes, Alyssa did the big maps. And then the map for the scenario, the bookshop, is actually based on an actual bookshop that Ben worked in Covent Garden, called it's Waterstones at Covent Garden on New Row. And I went in and took lots and lots of photographs, and then I had to draw a sketch map trying to work out all the angles, because it's a very strangely shaped shop for anyone who's ever been in there. And then I sent that off to a lovely woman called Anna Urbanek, who then did that map for that. And we had Matt Ryan, our fantastic in-house cartographer, doing all the Folly plans as well. So we had 3 very talented cartographers working on the book.
Oh, excellent. So I asked because I've always loved the architecture, or not architecture, not how London is put together. And I've watched some documentaries about how that came to be, and the bridges, and like at one point there used to be like merchant businesses on bridges, and
the old bridges were just absolute chaos, because they would have people building on them, usually because bridges quite often ended up outside various local laws, or they kind of ended up falling between boroughs and things. Like I said, I live near Newcastle. That's the original Tyne Bridge was like that. There was literally a blue stone on the old Tyne Bridge, where if you were a criminal, if you passed the blue stone, you were in the next district over, so the police from the other one couldn't get you. So you could literally stand on one side of a stone and go blah, 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 at the police, and there's nothing they could do. So bridges with buildings and things on have a great history of that sort of thing. And obviously you have rivers, they have merchants, they have stories, they have people coming to them from all over the world. And you get this wonderful melting pot, as you mentioned earlier, of folklore, tradition, ghost stories, weird stuff going on. And it's a very, very rich and interesting vein to mine. And, London is a very old city, and it has a lot of history that you can, rifle through to create interesting stories in.
Hmm. You know, I'm glad to hear not only that. I mean, I was gonna get this anyway. Anyone mystery and fantasy. That's like that my favorite sandwich in literature. And so this was already on my radar. But hearing that you're taking the Call of Cthulhu rules and streamlining it and making it to its own thing, I'm really intrigued by that also because I love seeing variant rules for certain things and especially with the fact that this is gonna be like its own role playing game.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. Is there?
Well, I know Paul was absolutely thrilled to bits because one reviewer called it BRP elegant. And I think that's a really nice way of describing it. Actually, we've it's recognizably BRP Call of Cthulhu, but it goes and does its own thing and introduces new elements. There's not hit points anymore. The sort of levels of damage, um, and the spell system and things. So it's hopefully we think it has kept all the really cool stuff from Call of Cthulhu, but given it its own spin and made it its own system.
Hmm. Is there anything more about this that I haven't asked that you want to share? Any extra tidbits?
Oh, oh gosh, I don't know. Always with the hard questions, Manny. It's, I mean, it was a lot of fun to work on, and it's one of those really weird things because quite often interviewers will say, "What's your dream property to work on?" And I've been very lucky in the fact that this was my dream property. This was something that I wanted to see become a game, and I'm absolutely thrilled to bits that it has. And we had a fantastic team of people working on it, and they put a lot of hard work in, and it's down to them that we have this absolutely beautiful game. We had a fantastic bunch of artists, a great team of writers. Obviously Paul was the lead rules designer, Ben was chipping in with the rules with ideas and things, he said, because he knows what he's doing. Mike Mason was mentoring me through it because I was line editor at Acton Cthulhu when they were doing the big Kickstarter campaign, but I came on late in the day, so all of the authors and everything and all of the budgets had already been sorted when I came in to take over because the original line editor had to drop out. So this was really my first big, you're developing a brand new game and you have to manage everything. So thankfully I had Mike there to keep me straight and to give me advice as to how to do this and not make a total mess of things. So I'm very grateful to him. And like I said, the design team, the writing team, the art team, the cartographers, Sim and Nick on graphic design and layout, they were all absolutely fantastic. And also, the management took a risk. This is an external licensed product, and they don't always work out, but we were lucky. We have been very fortunate and very lucky, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work on, and I really hope that people enjoy playing it.
Hmm. And is the PDF available now? Do you know when the
The
estimated
PDF is
time when the?
available. Yeah, PDF is available. That came out end of November last year, in time for Dragon Meet, so we could continue the history of, we've announced the license at Dragon Meet and here's now the game at Dragon Meet. And the physical version came out on the 17th of April, so you can get your physical book if you like your hardback books, and you can get your electronic one. And obviously we're part of Bits and Mortar. If you buy directly from Chaosium as well, you'll get your physical and your PDF too. And there's a whole load of free stuff available for download as well. So like the handouts, the maps, character sheets, pre-generated characters. Ben wrote, with a little bit of arm twisting, an exclusive original short story for the beginning of the book, which is hilarious and terribly meta for those of you who've read it. And it's basically the people in the folly learning how to play Call of Cthulhu. So they're creating Call of Cthulhu characters. So Ben and I actually statted up the characters from the story as Call of Cthulhu investigators, and we've made those available to download as well.
One last question: if I was running this game and you were playing, um, who would you be?
Oh, I think I'd probably like to be somebody like a librarian. I mean, there's a character in one of the short stories called Elsie Hatbox Winstanley, who's a mad old bat, basically, but she's hilarious. And I think I'd like to play um, someone like that. So, not necessarily a magic user, but someone who has useful skills that the magic users will need to come to, because, you know, they're all about flashes and bangs, but they're not necessarily all that rooted in the real world.
Hmm. All right, excellent. Well, viewers, this is available now. Go ahead to your local store and see if you can pick up a copy or ask for a copy, um, and or order a copy there. And if not, I'll put a link description where you can purchase the PDF. And I believe that is it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you
Um,
ever so much for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
all right, and take care, everyone. Stay safe. Have a good summer. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.